My wife told me they'd be spending Christmas with her ex because our daughter needed her real father. I couldn't believe it, so I walked out. A whole week later, she came crawling back, regretting every single thing she had done. Her words sliced through me like ice. She needs her real father. The moment Olivia said that, casually, over breakfast, I knew my life was over. Now, I'm sitting in an airport lounge in Boston, watching my old world shrink below me at 30,000 feet, wondering how I ever got here. This story didn't start with me leaving. It started with a dollhouse and a little girl who called me Daddy Ethan for 6 years straight. I'm Ethan, 42, worked at a paper mill in Omaha, Nebraska, for the last 15 years. The kind of guy who fixes things, keeps his head down, doesn't make waves. I married Olivia when her daughter, Chloe, was 3. And that kid became my whole world in ways I didn't know were possible. Every Saturday morning, we'd be in the garage working on something, her little hands holding the flashlight while I explained why you always measure twice and cut once. She listened like I was teaching her the secrets of the universe. The dollhouse took us 3 months to build, proper wood, real shingles, tiny working shutters she painted purple because that was her favorite color. When we finished it, she threw her arms around my neck and said, "You're the best daddy ever." And nothing, absolutely nothing, in my life had ever felt more right than that moment. Olivia was different, though. Always had been, I guess. Reserved, distant, the kind of person who lived in the same house but seemed miles away. She worked at the hospital in scheduling, came home tired most nights, scrolled through her phone during dinner, went to bed early. We existed together, but somewhere along the way, we stopped being married. I didn't push it because Chloe was happy, and that's what mattered, keeping things stable for her. Then came December, 3 weeks before Christmas, and Olivia hit me with it over breakfast while Chloe was upstairs getting ready for school. She said it so casually, like she was discussing the weather. Told me she and Chloe would be spending Christmas with her ex-husband, Jason. That Chloe needed time with her biological father. I just sat there, my coffee halfway to my mouth, trying to process what I was hearing. I asked if she was seriously taking our daughter to spend Christmas with a man who'd walked out when Chloe was 2 and barely remembered her birthday most years. Olivia looked at me with this cold expression and said, "She needs her real father, Ethan. If you don't like it, divorce me." The way she said real father, like I was just some guy who happened to live there. Like 6 years of bedtime stories and scraped knees and parent-teacher conferences meant absolutely nothing. I didn't argue, didn't yell, didn't slam doors. Something inside me just went quiet. That feeling when you realize you've been fighting for something that's already gone. I went to work that day and sat in my truck during lunch, staring at nothing. And that's when I remembered the email I'd been ignoring for months. The company had been offering transfers to their facility in Vancouver, Canada, for specialists who knew the old machinery. Better pay, housing allowance, the whole package. I'd turned it down 3 times because how do you move a family halfway across the world? But sitting there in that parking lot, with Olivia's words playing on repeat in my head, I realized I'd been putting my life on hold for people who didn't actually want me in theirs. I walked straight to my supervisor's office and told him I'd take the Vancouver position if it was still available. He looked surprised, asked if I was sure, if my family was on board. I just nodded, because what was I supposed to say? That evening, I came home, and Olivia was packing Chloe's suitcase. Chloe was excited because Daddy, her real daddy apparently, had promised her a big Christmas. She asked if I was coming too, and I had to tell her no, that I had work stuff to handle. The look of disappointment on her face nearly killed me, but I kept my expression neutral. Olivia didn't ask about my day. Didn't notice that something fundamental had shifted. Just reminded me they'd be gone for 10 days. The week before they left, I finished paperwork at work, sorted out my affairs, moved like I was underwater. The night before they left, I sat in Chloe's room after she fell asleep and just watched her breathe, memorizing her face, the little purple dollhouse on her dresser that we'd built together. Christmas Eve, I was alone in the house, and I put on It's a Wonderful Life because that's what we always watched as a family. I sat there in the dark, watching George Bailey realize his life mattered, thinking how ironic it was that mine apparently didn't. At midnight, I opened my laptop and sent the acceptance email. Told them I could start mid-January, asked them to arrange the fastest transfer possible. Christmas Day, Olivia called from Jason's place. She sounded happy in a way I hadn't heard in years. Told me they were having a great time, that Chloe was bonding with her real family. She didn't ask how I was spending Christmas. I didn't tell her about Vancouver, just said I was glad they were having fun, and hung up. When they came back on the 27th, Olivia seemed different, more confident, like she'd made up her mind about something. Chloe was quieter than usual, didn't run to hug me like she normally would. That night, after Chloe went to bed, I told Olivia about the transfer, that I was leaving in 2 weeks. I watched her face for any reaction. She just nodded and said, "Well, I guess that makes things easier," and went back to her phone. The next 2 weeks were surreal. Packing up my life, saying goodbye to coworkers who seemed more upset about me leaving than my own wife did. Chloe asked questions I couldn't really answer. Why was I going so far away? When would I be back? Could she come visit? I told her I'd send letters and presents. That I'd video call whenever I could. But I could see in her eyes that she thought I was abandoning her, just like Jason had. My last night in Omaha, I drove past the paper mill, past Chloe's school, past all the places that had been my life for 15 years, and I felt nothing. Just this strange, empty calm. The flight to Vancouver was 30 hours with layovers. And somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, I realized I hadn't cried once through any of this. Hadn't broken down, hadn't fallen apart. I'd just gone quiet and made a choice. And now I was living with it. Vancouver was everything Omaha wasn't: quiet, organized, full of people who actually meant it when they said good morning. The company set me up in a decent apartment near the facility, clean white walls, furniture that didn't have anyone's history attached to it. For the first 2 weeks, I just worked and slept, and tried not to think about what I'd left behind. The job was exactly what they promised: specialized maintenance on machinery most people didn't know how to fix anymore. My coworkers respected that, treated me like I actually knew what I was doing. I'd wake up at 5, hit the gym, go to work, come home, make dinner, sit on my balcony watching the sun set over the ocean. And the whole time, there was this voice in my head asking if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. I tried reaching out to Chloe constantly, sent her messages through the iPad I'd gotten her for her birthday, told her about the mountains I'd seen. About how different everything looked, about how much I missed our Saturday projects. Complete radio silence. I told myself, maybe Olivia was just keeping her busy. Maybe she needed time to adjust. I sent a package after 3 weeks, Canadian candy, a stuffed beaver, this little wooden deer I'd carved myself because I remembered how much she loved the duck I'd made her last spring. I paid extra for tracking. Watched it get delivered to the house in Omaha. And then nothing. No thank you text, no photo, nothing at all. That's when the guilt really started eating at me. Because what if Olivia was right? What if leaving made me exactly like Jason, just another father figure who'd walked away when things got hard? I started having dreams where Chloe was calling for me and I couldn't reach her, where I'd show up to the house and it was empty. My supervisor noticed I was off, asked if everything was okay, and I told him it was an adjustment. Then came the photo in early February, and that's when everything crashed down. My buddy Marcus from the mill sent me a message that just said, "Man, I'm sorry. Thought you should know," with a picture attached. It was from one of those photo booth things at the mall. Olivia and Chloe and Jason all dressed in matching sweaters, looking like a perfect little family. Jason had his arm around Olivia. Olivia was smiling bigger than I'd seen in years. And Chloe was between them. But here's what got me: she wasn't smiling. Not really. She had this hollow look in her eyes that I recognized because I'd seen it in my own mirror. I stared at that photo for an hour, zooming in, and noticed the date. It was from last week, which meant this wasn't just Christmas. This was ongoing. They were playing house while I was on the other side of the world. I called Olivia that night, hands shaking, and when she picked up, she sounded annoyed, like I was interrupting something. I asked about the photo, what was going on, and she got defensive immediately. Told me I'd made my choice when I took the Vancouver job, that Chloe needed stability, and Jason was providing that. I asked to talk to Chloe, and Olivia said she was already asleep, which was weird because it was only 7 there. When I pushed back, her voice went cold and she said, "You gave up the right to make demands when you abandoned us," and hung up. I tried calling back, nothing. Tried texting, nothing. Tried reaching Chloe's iPad and realized I'd been blocked. That's when panic set in. Real panic. Because I'd left to preserve what was left of my dignity, but I'd never intended to lose Chloe completely. I called a lawyer the next morning, some family law guy in Omaha that Marcus recommended. I laid out the whole situation. He was quiet for a long time, and then said, "Mr. Halverson, you need to understand something. Your wife filed for divorce 2 weeks after you left, in a tone that made my blood run cold. Turns out Olivia had filed in late January, citing abandonment and neglect, had documented that I'd moved to another country without discussing custody, had painted a picture of me as someone who'd chosen career over family. The lawyer told me she was trying to establish Jason as Chloe's primary father figure, that she'd enrolled Chloe in counseling specifically to document the trauma of me leaving, that she was building a case to cut me out completely. I asked what my options were, and he said honestly, from Vancouver with no custody agreement in place, not many. That family courts didn't look kindly on parents who left the country, even if the situation was complicated. He said the hearing was scheduled for late May, that I had about 3 months to build a defense, but that I needed to be physically present in Nebraska to have any real chance. I hung up and just sat there in my apartment, realizing this place that had seemed like a fresh start was actually a trap I'd walked right into. Olivia had played this perfectly, had pushed me into leaving, had documented everything, had turned my attempt to preserve my dignity into evidence of abandonment. I checked my bank account that afternoon and found Olivia had tried to withdraw everything from our joint savings, $23,000 we'd been putting away for years. The only reason it hadn't gone through was because the bank flagged it as suspicious. I called them immediately, got it locked down, moved half into a separate account because the lawyer said that was the legal thing to do. Olivia called 2 hours later screaming about how I was trying to leave her and Chloe with nothing. I just let her yell because there was no point defending myself anymore. When she finally stopped to breathe, I said very calmly, "I'm coming back, Olivia. We're going to figure this out in court." I could hear the shock in her silence before she said, "You can't just come back. You have a job there." I told her I'd already talked to my supervisor, that they'd agreed to let me work remotely temporarily, that I'd be back in Nebraska within 2 weeks. And then I hung up. The guilt I'd been carrying shifted into something else during that flight back, something colder and more focused. Because I wasn't going back to save my marriage, that was dead and buried. I was going back for Chloe, for that little girl who'd called me Daddy Ethan and built a dollhouse with me and trusted me completely until I'd let her down. The plane touched down in Denver for my layover. I bought a coffee and sat watching families move past. Dads carrying kids on their shoulders, moms holding little hands. And I thought about how I needed my daughter to know I hadn't abandoned her, that I was still her Daddy Ethan, even if her mother and Jason were trying to write me out of the story. Omaha in late February looked exactly how I felt, gray and cold and unwelcome. I landed on a Tuesday morning and went straight to a motel because I wasn't about to sleep in that house. My lawyer's office was downtown in a building that smelled like old coffee and stress. When I walked in, he looked relieved, like he'd been half expecting me not to show. We spent 4 hours going through everything, bank statements, text messages, emails, phone records, building a timeline of exactly what had happened and when. He told me the custody hearing was set for May 23rd. That Olivia's lawyer was pushing for full custody with supervised visitation for me at best, arguing I was a flight risk since I'd already left the country once. I asked what our chances were, and he leaned back and said, "Ethan, it depends on what we can prove. You've got financial records and work history showing you've been a committed parent, but she's got the abandonment narrative and the fact that you're not Chloe's biological father, which means you have no automatic legal rights here. That made my stomach drop because I'd been so focused on being her dad that I'd forgotten in the eyes of the law I was just a stepfather. He said we needed to establish a pattern of parental involvement before I left, prove that Olivia had engineered my departure, and document her parental alienation over the past 2 months. And we had 12 weeks to do it. That afternoon, I started making rounds. First to the bank where I got statements showing every deposit to Chloe's college fund, every payment for her school activities, every purchase for birthdays and holidays. Then to the school where I talked to her teacher, Ms. Davies, who remembered me from parent-teacher conferences and volunteer days. She looked uncomfortable when I explained what was happening, but admitted that Chloe had been struggling since I left, that her grades had dropped, that she'd become withdrawn and stopped participating. I asked if she'd be willing to provide a statement, and she hesitated, but finally agreed because she said, "That little girl talked about you constantly, Mr. Halverson. You were her hero." And hearing that past tense nearly broke me. The school counselor was next, a woman named Ms. Chin. When I explained the situation, she told me she'd received a subpoena from Olivia's lawyer and would be testifying at the hearing, but couldn't discuss the specifics of Chloe's sessions with me directly due to confidentiality. What she could tell me was that she'd be providing her professional observations to the court. The way she said it, careful but meaningful, gave me hope that maybe the truth was more complicated than Olivia's version. I rented a small apartment on the north side. Nothing fancy, just a place to sleep while I built my case. Every night I'd sit there making lists of every soccer game I'd attended, every school project I'd helped with, every nightmare I'd comforted her through, trying to quantify 6 years of fatherhood into evidence a judge would accept. Marcus stopped by one evening with pizza and told me Olivia had been spreading stories around town, saying I'd abandoned my family for a job in Vancouver, that I'd never really loved Chloe, that Jason was stepping up to be the father she'd always needed. I asked if people believed her, and he said, "Some do, some don't. Small towns, you know, but the people who actually know you aren't buying it." Over the next 10 weeks, I threw myself into building the strongest case possible. My lawyer got Jason's financial records through discovery and found out he was 4 months behind on child support from his first marriage, that he'd had 2 DUIs in the past 5 years, that his stability wasn't quite as solid as Olivia was claiming. We documented every blocked call, every refused video chat, every returned letter, building a pattern of parental alienation that even a skeptical judge would have to acknowledge. I drove past Chloe's school a few times hoping to catch a glimpse of her, but never had the courage to actually approach because I knew it would only complicate things legally. The weeks crawled by, March into April into May, and the whole time I was terrified that I'd come all this way and still lose her. 2 days before the hearing, I finally let myself drive by the house. Our house, technically, though it didn't feel like mine anymore. The driveway was empty, but I could see through the window that the living room had been rearranged. New furniture, different curtains, like they were erasing any trace of me ever being there. I sat in my truck across the street for 20 minutes, just staring. And then I saw her, Chloe, walking past the window carrying something. Even from that distance, I could see she looked smaller somehow, like she'd folded in on herself. I wanted to jump out and run to her. But I knew that would destroy everything I'd been working toward. So, I just sat there watching until she disappeared from view. And then I drove away. That night, I couldn't sleep. Just lay in bed thinking about how tomorrow would determine everything. Whether I'd get to be her father again, or whether Olivia and Jason would succeed in writing me out of her life completely. The courthouse the next morning was exactly what you'd expect, marble floors and uncomfortable wooden benches and lawyers hustling between courtrooms. Olivia showed up with Jason, both dressed nice, and she looked confident, almost smug, like this was already decided. She didn't even glance at me when they walked past, just kept her eyes forward like I wasn't worth acknowledging. My lawyer squeezed my shoulder and said, "Remember, stay calm. Answer honestly, let the evidence speak." And then the bailiff called us to order, and the judge walked in, a stern woman in her 60s who'd apparently seen every custody fight imaginable. The next 4 hours were brutal. Olivia's lawyer painting me as an abandoner who'd prioritized career over family, who'd left without warning, who had no legal standing as a non-biological parent. My lawyer countered with financial records, with testimony from Ms. Davies and neighbors, with phone logs showing my blocked attempts at contact, with evidence of Olivia's parental alienation and Jason's questionable history. Then came the moment that changed everything. The judge said she wanted to speak with Chloe privately in her chambers. And 45 minutes later, they came back out, and Chloe's eyes were red from crying. But when she looked at me, I saw something I hadn't seen in months. Recognition, and maybe hope. The judge sat down, reviewed her notes for what felt like forever. And then she spoke. I'll never forget what she said. I've been doing this job for 23 years, and I've learned that biology doesn't make you a parent. Showing up does. And sometimes the people who fight hardest for children are the ones who chose to be their parents rather than the ones who simply are. She granted me primary physical custody, ordered a formal custody evaluation to be completed within 60 days to finalize arrangements, mandated family therapy for Chloe to process everything, and ordered Olivia to pay my legal fees due to her documented parental alienation. She also issued a temporary restraining order preventing Olivia from interfering with my contact with Chloe pending the final evaluation. The courtroom went silent for exactly 3 seconds before Olivia started yelling about appeals and how this wasn't over. But I wasn't listening because Chloe had pulled away from Olivia's grip and was walking toward me, slowly at first, and then faster. And then she was running, and I was meeting her halfway, and she crashed into me saying, "I knew you didn't leave me, Daddy Ethan." I knew it, over and over into my shirt. We went to my apartment that afternoon, not the house where we'd built the dollhouse, but somewhere new where we could start over. I made her favorite dinner while she sat at the counter telling me about everything I'd missed, about school and friends, and how confused she'd been when I left. How Olivia had told her I'd chosen Vancouver over her, but she never quite believed it. That night, I tucked her into the guest room that was now her room, and she held onto my hand and asked, "Can we build something this weekend like we used to?" And I told her we could build anything she wanted. After she fell asleep, I sat in the living room, exhausted and relieved, and still processing how close I'd come to losing her forever. How different this could have ended if I hadn't fought back. On the small bookshelf across the room, I spotted something that stopped me cold. That little wooden deer I'd carved in Vancouver and sent in the package months ago. She must have grabbed it from the house before we left. And seeing it there felt like proof that even when everything fell apart, some connections are stronger than distance or lies or time. And that being a father isn't about biology or geography. It's about showing up even when everything tells you to walk away. What would you have done?